You know, Richard, if this is announced before Powell's term ends in, I think it's May of next year, right? This whole issue of when that name comes out is going to create a shadow Fed chair. Isn't that going to lead to confusion to markets?
It potentially could. You know, the important point is, in order for someone to become Fed chair, he or she has to not only be nominated by the president, but has to be confirmed by the Senate, and there has to be a vacancy. So a vacancy on the Fed board does not open up until January of 2026. And so if you want to get someone confirmed by January of 2026, you have to announce the nomination probably in October or November. So it will inevitably be the case that there's going to be someone nominated to replace Chair Powell months before his term is up, and that's just the way the process works. Will it be confusing? Potentially. However, I would say, having gone through the confirmation process, nominees are often instructed to not make a lot of news before their confirmation hearing, and that could put the nominee in a tough spot, you know, if his name is Bessent or Kevin Hassett or Chris Waller for that matter.
So I have to ask you, Richard, you know, I think it's known pretty well by now that there's no way that the president can legally fire Chair Powell because of disagreements over monetary policy, which is pretty evident, right? The president's,
yes.
You know, he's going on and on and on about how rates need to be down at 1%. He could, though, potentially fire him for cause, and this whole issue of, you know, cost overruns at the Fed for renovations. I think they're $700 million over budget. There looks like they're going to try to get him that way. Are they going to be successful, do you think?
Well, I think Secretary Bessent, again, has been making some news, and he was asked that question in the last day or so, and I think the president was asked that question on Sunday, and more or less said, look, I'm not going to fire Powell, Chair Powell. I think there are folks in the administration who have indicated that they're looking into it, but no, I don't think this is really going to go anywhere. I think Jerome Powell is going to be the Fed chair until at least May of next year.
I don't want to flog a dead horse, right, but I think it's important we talk about this whole issue of Fed independence simply because of your backstory, your history. You've been in the room, right? You were Fed vice chair. You know the mechanics. Yeah. You know how things work. So the pushback against the idea that, oh, no, if the president fires Powell and gets his man in, the pushback against that is, one, obviously it's a decision by committee, right? Two, the leadership of the committee is by tradition, it's not by law. And three, you brought up the whole nomination process. Usually what happens historically, and we saw that with Chair Powell as well, is even after being nominated by Trump, people like that tend not to want to curry favor once they're actually in the job. They shed past allegiances and they work more for the institution's legislative mandate. Are those enough checks and balances against the possibility that the president could get his man in the job?
Well, I think so. And it is important to remember because, you know, we all talk about the Powell Fed and the Greenspan and the Volcker, the Yellen, Bernanke Fed, but by statute, interest rate decisions are made by a committee vote. The chair only has one vote. Now, it is the case that we have not seen a chair outvoted really since the 1930s, so it's unusual. But the system is set up to provide a check in that matter. Also, I think one important element of this is anyone who now would be a candidate to be Fed chair is going to be, you know, over the age of 40, and that person's going to know from either life experience or the history books, which is that history will not be kind to the Fed chair who goes down in the history books as squandering 40 years of price stability. Probably the most blatant example of the Fed becoming political occurred in the Nixon administration under Arthur Burns, a very respected academic economist who'd advised Eisenhower. And, you know, under Arthur Burns, inflation went from 3% to, 13%. And the taping system in the Nixon White House now reveals to anyone who wants to listen that Burns is working closely with Nixon to help him get reelected. And Burns is not treated very well in the history book. So I think there's that element of, well, and I think once you do enter the Federal Reserve, certainly in my case as vice chair, I became more of a student of Fed history, and I think that's another check on the Fed chair as well.